All right. Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to Village Church. My name is Mark. I'm the lead pastor here at the church. Good to have you. We are doing something completely different today. If this is your first week, we don't usually have three of us up here, but today we're going to. So this is Sam and Josh Alderson. They're going to be up here to illustrate a point that I want to draw out of the text that we're in. So if you got a Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 4 is where we are. And a couple weeks ago, Pastor Ken hit the first 5 verses of chapter 4. And in these verses that Paul talks about, 1 Corinthians 4, he makes this very interesting point that he keeps hammering. And what I want to try to do throughout this series, the Masterclass series, is when Paul keeps coming back to a point over and over again, I want to actually try to illustrate that point and ground it in a real life story. Not just have it be abstract and ideas for us, but to go, okay, Paul keeps coming back over and over and over again. What is he trying to say? Is there a story of people that I know, people in the church that really illustrate this thing that he's trying to hit? And these guys really exemplify a particular point he's trying to make, probably kind of in a negative way, but we're going to get to that. So here's the point Paul makes. He's talking about the fact that they're elevating leaders, Apollos and Paul, and they worship them, and they have all these things. And his point to the Corinthians is he says, if you keep doing that, you're going to be, and here's what he says in verse 6, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one another. For who sees anything, verse 7, different in you? What do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it? Already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. And so he makes this point that they are out trying to, they're getting conceited, they're getting haughty, they're kind of into themselves. And he says, don't you realize you have everything you want? Don't you understand? You're going after riches, but you're already rich. And he doesn't mean to them that they have physical material wealth, because they're in 1 Corinthians, it's a city, Corinth, and they're not rich people. The church certainly isn't rich. And he says, don't you understand? You're already rich. You have everything. If you are in Jesus, you already have everything you want, and you are a recipient of grace. But if you think it's about you, you're going to get puffed up. And here's what happens in life. When we get puffed up, when we begin to go after things that maybe God doesn't want us to be going after, what will happen so often, and it's not good for our life, but the fact is, if we go after those things, God loves us so much that sometimes what he'll do is actually disrupt our life. He will cut us off at the knees in order to humble us so that we stop going after the wrong things and we recognize that we are pure recipients of grace. We have everything that we ever need, but oftentimes the only way he gets our attention is by actually messing everything up, which is why you're here. As you can see, they're two messed up people, all right? So we found them. They're the dregs of society. We found these two. And we said, okay, how do we actually talk to these guys about their story that I heard a few years ago? But they were in a situation in life. They had everything from a worldly perspective that you would want. They were, I know this is hard to believe, but they were both models at one point. Back in the day, they met actually in like a Christian modeling agency. They were doing the New York thing and the Europe thing and parties, and they had everything that would make you puffed up. They had everything from a worldly perspective you would want. They moved to Chicago. They got married. They moved to Chicago, doing very well in business. And then what happened? Everything was good. Everything was great. You were going along. You were making it, doing your thing. And then something happened a bunch of years ago. Tell us.
Well, in 2000, Black Monday hit, and every amount of savings that we had completely disintegrated in about 45 minutes.
Right.
And then we were reliant on the company that we were working for, and the person that we were working for basically was not a very good person.
Right.
And so, in fact, at one point in time, he even tried to split my wife and I up.
Wow.
3 kids, and basically
no money,
dependent on somebody else for our income. Mm-hmm. And it got to a point where we had to make a decision that we needed to leave. And my sister-in-law came to visit us in Chicago, offered us a job. I went from wearing 3-piece suits to filling fire extinguishers.
Here, you moved back, so you're in Chicago?
Yes.
So you had to come back. You grew up, Joslyn?
I grew up here, yeah.
Here, okay.
Yeah.
So you come back here, tail between your legs. You were living the high life. Yeah, Vancouver, you guys can, And now, boom, all your money's gone in literally 45 minutes. You had tons of savings, stocks, all that stuff gone.
Yeah, we packed up the car, moved west, moved in with my parents, and had to start over.
Right, which is always great for a marriage when you have kids, living with your parents.
Yeah, you can't imagine
Really
the phone call when he told me that all the money was gone.
Right.
That was a great day.
Right. But the good thing is when you move back with your parents, they're making breakfast and stuff, so you had some positives.
True.
Well, I dealt with a lot of anger at that point in time. In fact, I got to a point where, I mean, I don't even know if I've ever told anybody else this story.
This is probably a good place to roll it out for the first time. Just wing it, see how it goes.
So we're trying to find another place to live, and at one point in time, we're talking to a builder, and my anger had boiled up so much that he had made some comment on the phone that I disagreed with. I took the phone and threw it across the table, and it smashed into my mother-in-law's oven and completely exploded the glass everywhere.
Right. Oh, perfect.
Oh yeah, it was not a good. And there was points in time when Joslyn actually found me completely unresponsive, sitting on park benches, just because I was so decimated by and what we thought that God had actually led us to Chicago to actually open up this business. And it got to a point where, you know, you think you hear God's voice.
Right.
You know, and then you start blaming God.
Right. So yeah, take us back to that. Your faith was, you're building up Chicago, you're obviously following Jesus. You get there, what kind of starts to happen in Chicago? Is your faith stay strong in Chicago, or do you start to derail a bit?
No, I would say we got so caught up. The business was going so well and flourishing, and we just found ourselves getting so caught up in that, that our faith just started to dwindle. And we just were more focused on money and wealth. And, you know, we still had this idea that we were going to work really hard for 5 years, and then we were going to go to the mission field. And but that focus just slowly moved away from that. And it was just all about getting ahead and making money.
Right. So you come back here, you're living at your parents' house. That was what year, 2002?
2002.
Come back here, so you're just working, raising kids. And you know, in some way, you could look at a text like this and go, man, if God wants to humble me because I'm getting puffed up or I'm going after the wrong things, and he wants to tell me that I have already everything I need, then maybe that's good enough. So you're thinking, okay, cool, we had our humbling experience, great. And then what happened? 4 years in.
March 17th, 2006, I was feeling extremely ill. It got to a point where, you know, some people were over for dinner, and I just said, I need to go to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night, just so ill. It just, my body was dealing with something I had never experienced before. I kept telling my wife I needed to go to the walk-in clinic. I'll let her finish that story, but anyway.
What was your response? Very loving?
You know, as women are when men get sick.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, babe, you're fine. Just go to sleep. It's okay. I've got errands to run. I'll be back in a few hours. I'll check on you.
Deal with your man cold, child.
Yeah.
Yeah. Suck it up.
So finally she gets home after doing all of her important errands, and she ended up taking me to the walk-in clinic. I was so sick, I just walked past everybody that was sitting in the waiting room, found a bed to lie down in, and the nurse came in, took my blood pressure, and she said, Mr. Alderson, your blood pressure is dangerously low. We need to get you to the hospital. We've called an ambulance. Right,
so then you, at this point, remember?
I remember nothing after that.
So what happened, Josh?
Anyway, when they ask about the story, they're always asking Sam, and then he's like, I don't know, I was asleep for the rest of it. So we you know, it was a whirlwind of events, so it's hard to keep them, you know, all exactly how they happened. But bottom line, we got him to the hospital. They started pumping him with antibiotics. They didn't know what was wrong with him, so they're just trying kind of a cocktail of whatever they can do. He's starting to get really anxious, having a hard time breathing. They kept him overnight. The next morning, the doctor said, listen, he's not getting any better. He says he can't breathe. I think it's just anxiousness, but we're gonna be cautious, and we've decided we're gonna induce a coma and intubate him for a few days. He'll be totally fine, but he can get through the infection, and then we'll, you know, take him off the medication in a few days, and, you know, then he'll slowly come back to recovery. So that's what they did. They were trying to intubate him. It took a number of hours. I was waiting in the, outside ICU. Finally, it seemed like they stabilized him. So they said, listen, he's asleep. Come in, look at him. He looks fine. Go home and get yourself some sleep. So I go home for a couple hours, and then I get a call from the doctor. And he says, Mrs. Alderson, I'm really sorry, but we're going to do our best to save your husband, but his organs are shutting down. And we're going to have to move him to Surrey Memorial because we just don't have the medical equipment here. And we don't know what else to do. He needs some, special attention. So that's what they did. They packed him up and took him out to Surrey Memorial. And then for literally...
So how was the shift for you experientially between go get a nap, he's fine, to, we're going to try to save him, but... We're not sure.
At first, I laid down for a nap. So when the call came in, at first I was like, no, sorry, you must have the wrong person. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And they're like, no, Mrs. Alderson, his organs are shutting down. This is it. So of course,
way more serious than we thought.
Panic, total panic.
Right.
Yeah, because up till then, I don't really think I realized how serious it was.
Right. So they move him.
So they move him. Now my family's coming around, and we're starting to get worried. And basically, the doctors have said that. It's about a 60 to 80% mortality rate when your organs start shutting down because it's called sepsis shock. I'm not a doctor, but your blood is now infected with a bacteria and it's running through your body.
Right.
So they said, he's a healthy young man, so the odds are on our side, but we're just going to have to watch him for the next 5 days and hope for the best.
Okay. So then what did you do? So you start calling your family and saying, pray and...
Yeah, we had an amazing group of people back from when we were in New York, really strong, faithful people that just started to pray. And
people started to get on planes?
Well, actually, the planes didn't happen until a few days later because what was happening was it looked like things were getting better. And so the doctors were like, okay, listen, now we think, the medication is working, so we're going to slowly wean him off the morphine and then hopefully take out the tube and he'll start to recover.
Okay, so then what happened?
So then what happens is they've got him off the morphine for 2 days and they can't figure out why he's not responding. He should have slowly been waking up. His body was all extreme. So his, blood pressure high, blood pressure low, heart rate high, heart rate low, freezing cold, super hot, just all over the place. So then they start worrying because his blood pressure had been so low from the initial infection that their worry was that during that time when his blood pressure was really low, that it had not enough oxygen had got to the brain. And so they thought that maybe there had been some sort of brain damage and that was why his body couldn't regulate itself because there had been damage to that part of the brain.
Right.
So that's when they said, okay, we're going to take him in for a CAT scan. This is a week in now. Mm-hmm. So they said, we're going to take him in for a CAT scan. And I remember saying, all the way through, God was just like, I've never felt so close to the Lord during that time. As crazy as it was, as scary as it was just like, we know he's inside us and we know he's walking by our side, but that intense feeling of like, I got this, I'm with you on this. But I remember saying to the doctors, listen, I know you're doing the CAT scan at 9 a.m. I'm prepared to handle bad news, but please just don't make me wait all day. And I remember that day, just like, it was 10 hours of waiting. And I remember, I remember walking up to the nurses, and every time I'd walk up to ask them, is the doctor coming to give the answer? They kept closing their book. And I could see the pain on their face too, because we'd had a relationship. I'd been basically living there for a week. And so you could see they weren't able to tell me what was happening, but I knew it was bad news. And, to keep talking.
So he's...
You can't jump in because he was asleep.
He's in a coma. Give him a break.
Gosh.
Jeepers. Yeah, so he's in the room. You kept coming in, and they're closing the books because the doctor needs to tell you actually what the scenario of the CAT scan is.
Right.
So then they bring you in a room, but it's not just you and a doctor.
Yeah, so they finally the doctor comes in with a social worker, psychologist, and my brother's there and a girlfriend were there, and they bring us into this room. And basically the doctor says, we're really sorry, but he's had severe brain damage. And the areas that we see that the brain have been affected is this area back here that controls regulates your body. These areas, I don't remember that all now, but eyesight, ability to walk. We really have no idea what functions he'll get back. And they said, you have a very important decision to make. And they said, basically we have sort of a window in that if we remove the life support, chances are he will slowly slip away. If we don't remove the life support now and sort of wait it out, then that opportunity may lose itself. And I remember the doctor looking at me. In fact, it might have been the psychologist looking at me, and my brother's in pieces on the floor. And I remember him saying, not accusatory, but kind of, what kind of life do you really think your husband would want to lead?
Because at this point, they're telling you, he will not, he's had brain damage. That doesn't, those things don't grow back. Might not be able to see, not be able to walk again. He's not going to recognize you.
Yeah. He said the best you could hope is maybe he'll recognize you and your kids one day. That was kind of the biggest piece of hope we were supposed to gather from that.
And then the deduction was, I think at one point you said they used the word mush, like his brain's.
Yeah, again, there's, separate types of gray matter, white matter, and he said the whole thing was just clouded.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's probably not going to be able to recognize you, your kids, walk, talk, blah, blah. And then he says, basically, what kind of life would you want him, do you think he would want to live? Basically inferring you should probably just let him go.
Yes.
Right. So that's not a good day.
No, it's not a good day. And it's funny, at that moment, too, I remember, I believe God, does miracles today. And I believe he answers prayer. And it's not that I knew that Sam was going to be 100% better, but I knew that pulling a plug on him was not an option.
Right.
And I knew God had a bigger plan in all of this. And I remember saying to the doctors, who thought I was completely nuts, which is probably why they brought the social worker in there, I was like, he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. And they're like,
right.
and the doctor looks over at the social worker.
I'm going to put up a picture of Sam. I think he was a little bloated at this point in this picture, but there's a picture that we have. Yes. So we can kind of see that setting. But so you're looking at that, and the doctors are basically saying, pull it, he's done. So what do you do?
Well, at that point, I actually went home. I had to get out of there. We called all of our friends. At that point, we started calling his family because we're thinking, either he's going to, there was a good chance still that he could pass away. So we called in. My brother was in Europe. Sam's family were all over the place, his parents. So we made those horrible phone calls on the way home from the hospital. I just needed to be around family and get out of there for a minute. I'm sorry, I left you alone for a couple hours. But,
I don't remember.
But yeah, he doesn't remember. So we called in, in fact, my brother Rob was on his way home. He came home early from Europe, and he wrote Sam's eulogy on the airplane, which thankfully he was able to read you later on. So
you're making phone calls that he's dying. Yeah. So family's coming in. They're all gathering. People are praying, fasting. People around the world that are doing all this stuff. You were saying a non-Christian buddy of yours just created a blog so that people could pray and know what was going on.
My friend Sean Simpson created a blog, and it's actually still up there today. You can actually read it. And he explains the whole detail of what happened. And even the fact that he's not a Christian.
Right.
All of my Christian friends started actually posting prayers, things like that. I had a friend of mine, David Vardian, that was in Israel, was on I can't remember what mountain he was on at that point, actually on his knees praying when I woke up.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so take us to, so it's really bad news.
Right.
What happened
and Sam can soon talk to this. I think it was like 72 more hours of just, we had friends. They basically said whatever faculties, they knew that I decided to keep him alive. And so they said for the next 72 hours, whatever he's going to gain back, it's going to happen in those a number of days. Okay. So we had people positioned with him every minute of the day.
Right.
And so it was like, I think 3 days. It was like the third day. I again wasn't there. And well, you share what happened.
So a friend of mine, Carl Schmidt, was in my room, and I kept hearing Carl saying, Sam, we love you. Your family loves you. Your wife loves you. Your kids need you to play basketball with them. You need to wake up. You need to wake up. And then I heard him say...
And this is the first thing you remember now.
Yes.
So you remember...
And I'm thinking, why is...
walk-in clinic, and now this.
Yes, I'm thinking, why is Carl Schmidt in my bedroom? And he's asking me to wiggle my toes. So
just another Saturday morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I can wiggle my toes, and I hear him start to cry, and he calls the nurse in, and I could hear the nurse walk into the room. I still couldn't see. I'd lost up to 65 pounds after the picture that you saw. My organs started working again, and all the fluid started to flush out. But the nurse says, Sam, she starts asking me to do voice commands. Can you wiggle your toes? Can you squeeze my hand? And I couldn't squeeze her hand, but I could still wiggle my toes. So then they get Joslyn on the phone, and I can hear Joslyn in my ear on the phone, and I'm thinking, why is Carl in my bedroom, and where is Joslyn? So that was the first thing and then I kept going in and out of consciousness over the next couple of days. I would start to wake up a little bit. I saw my family. I saw my brother came from Tampa. My sister was from Connecticut. My other brother's from Indianapolis, and they were surrounding the bed. And I'm like, wow, something's wrong.
Right.
And I couldn't figure out what it was.
Right. So at that point, he's wiggling his toes. What do they say to you?
Sorry?
He's wiggling his toes. He's up. And what do they say to you? It's on. All of a sudden, it's...
Yeah, they said, you got to get over here. He's responding.
Right.
So, and then, I mean, it just day after day, he got better and better and slowly opened up his eyes. And he was wonky from the morphine. Like, I'm not going to lie. There was some crazy stuff that came out of his mouth. But he was on the road to recovery. It was incredible.
What was the thing you were telling me about the nurse with the morphine?
The two guys actually making methamphetamines in the next door bathroom. Yeah. So going through all of the drugs, getting out of my system, my brain being swollen and all of that, I had the craziest, and they are so vivid, and I still think that they were real, even though they tell me they're not. So I told a friend of mine who came to see me early in the morning, I said, you got to get me out of here. You got to get me in a private room. There's a guy next door. He and his son are actually making methamphetamines in the bathroom and selling them up and down the hallways. And you've got to get me out of here as quickly as you can. She's like, have you told Joslyn this? And I was like, yes. Where is she, by the way?
She's never here.
So she comes about an hour later and she says, have you seen the guy next door? And I said, yes, of course. I know exactly what he looks like. So she opens up the curtain, and here's this 98-year-old guy that had not been out of bed for months. And I'm like, well, they must have moved him. I don't know. It's happening. I can tell you. Anyway.
Yeah, so you're gonzo.
Yeah.
All right, so he's mush. He's done. Pull the plug, basically. His brain's gone. CT scan shows it. I mean, it's just so damaged. Now he's wiggling his toes. He's recognizing people. So the next...
Well, then they ordered so they had a neurologist come in and order an MRI because they were like, well, this doesn't make sense. CAT scan said it looks like this. And I remember the nurses coming up to me and said, we just can't believe he's even awake because we all looked at the CAT scan. We know what a CAT scan looks like, a good one versus a bad one. So they ordered the MRI.
And you don't come back from that. You don't walk out of here when it looks like that. Yeah.
So then they did an MRI a few days later with a neurologist, and again, I'm not a doctor, but they said the results of the two, they just don't match up.
Right.
So it was a completely normal,
and you have actually,
normal brain within 4 days of the CAT scan.
You have like a written form that I read where it talks about there is no indication of basically what they said you had
ischemic,
3 or 4 days later.
Ischemic injury.
3 or 4 days earlier, they said you have this, and then 3 or 4 days later, MRI is like, nope, not a thing. Didn't happen.
So the neurologist came in to give my family and Jocelyn's family and all of us kind of the results of what was going on. So she starts asking me questions, and asking me if I could remember things. And goodness sake, she looked like Dr. Laura.
Right.
So, yes, some of you know who Dr. Laura is. Anyway, so I look at my wife and I'm like, do we have marriage problems? Why is Dr. Laura here?
She's a marriage counselor. Yeah.
So anyway, so I was trying to be funny because I could tell that they were all worried about whether I was still in there or not. So I was trying to explain to my wife that I'm fine so she could understand my humor. And so the neurologist starts asking me more questions, and she looks at Joslyn and she's like, I think he's gonna need some more care.
Right.
She's like, no, he's fine. That's his humor.
He's just normally brain damaged.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway, at one point in time when I was in the hospital for 21 days, and at the very end, we went back to the ICU, and I was in a wheelchair. I had to actually relearn how to walk. I had to relearn how to eat, to actually talk, to swallow. And so the recovery after I started getting better was very quick. And they thought I'd be in the hospital for several months. And I was only in the hospital for 21 days. And so we went back to the ICU just to thank them. It was amazing to, I got a standing ovation, and we were all crying, and I was crying, they were crying. And it got to a point where, you start using the word miracle, and then the doctors are like, there had to have been something wrong with how the CAT scan went. Maybe you moved, or we're not really sure. In fact, my brother-in-law, Rob, wrote a letter to the neurologist asking for, he's an electrical engineer, asking for the details of the images of how I was positioned in the CAT scan, just in case it could have moved or not moved. Anyway, long story short, I recovered fully. It took me probably about 1.5 years to get completely. And
what was at the end of the day, what had happened?
I had streptococcal A pneumonia. So I got strep A, which is flesh-eating disease, as a strep throat, and got into my lungs when I got pneumonia at the same time. And so it went into my bloodstream and created a sepsis.
Right. And they said, what, you were telling me the chances they said of this happening are like, the doctor's like,
it's like 60 to 80% mortality rate, again, on the spectrum.
But the doctor said, you'll never meet anybody that you'll ever know that would have it, or you'll never get it again. Because I got nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness, am I susceptible to this again?
Right.
So anyway, that will never happen. And he said, I'll never meet anybody that will ever have it.
Wow. Okay, so take us back now to the faith component of this. You go through this, you get all this data. He comes out of this. I mean, at one point you had a friend from New York that I know as well. She came in and she was just like, gets up on the bed and just starts praying it.
Yeah, she was.
Just like, get up, Lazarus.
Up. You got kids, you got a family, get up. You're fine. God's gonna heal you. Yeah, so there's a lot of.
So really, I mean, you got healed. It was a miracle. And you come home, you start to rehab, and where does your faith go after this? How did it affect you?
So a friend of my mother-in-law's gave me a devotional book when I was in the hospital, and I could hardly lift my hands to even turn the pages. And it was crazy because I didn't turn to the day that I was in the hospital, that particular date. I just opened the book, and the scripture was from Psalm 73, and it says, my flesh and my heart may fail, but my God is my strength and my portion forever. That was the very first thing that I read. And what was crazy about all of that is in Psalm 73, it's Asaph who's talking about how angry he is at God because God basically, he thought that he had forgotten him. He had washed his hands, he'd prayed, and he's looking at all these other people that are successful in his life. And he's like, why are these people so successful? They don't love God like I love God. Right. And that was a very similar situation that I had gone through in the 4 years previous after a failed business and coming back to Vancouver with our tail between our legs.
Yeah. These people are not righteous and they're successful. I've been faithful and I'm getting hammered over here. What's the deal? Yeah. And so what did it?
It got to a point where, I started to question, I had all this anger from our failed business and anger at the person that we were working with. And the anger just released. I started praying and asking, God, what is it that you want from Joss and I and our family? You look at the story with Lazarus and the story about how this is not unto death, but you're going to actually give the glory to God. And it was a kind of somewhat similar to what I felt, is that if God can use our story in any way, shape, or form to either give people hope, because I know not everybody has a miracle happen in their life. There are people, we're all gonna die. But why did God do that to me?
Right.
And
what about you, Joss? What did it do for you?
For me, I think, I talked about how through it, God was just with me. That strength that you feel even in those valleys, and just this peace inside of me that he had it all under control. No matter what the outcome, I was going to be okay. My kids were going to be okay. It was all going to be okay. Right. And I think for me, I as the months got farther and farther away, and I often think about this, even last night, that at that moment you wish you could bottle up how you feel at that moment, because nothing matters except your relationship with him, and he's the only thing that could ever get you through something like that. And all the things of the world, none of them matter, So I think for me, I just had such a thankfulness that God chose us even to go through something difficult like this because of what it did for my faith.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that you would say, I wish I could bottle up how my relationship with the Lord was during the worst moment of my life. Like that it's in and this is a theme we come back to, it's in the pressure that you experience the intensity of God more. And when the further away you get from that pressure, the more routine it becomes again. And that's the crazy paradox that we all live in, is that you actually need the pressure for the intensity to rise, but you would never pray for it to happen in your life. We would never ask that to take place in someone's life. But God shows up in those moments, does an amazing thing. Talk about what it did for you. You came out, and now what did life look like after this experience for you?
Well, so again, it took me probably about 1.5 years to get to a point where I felt normal again. The doctors had said that I had some damage to the myelin sheeting on my brain because of the injury that I had and the bacteria. And he said that you will probably only be able to do 1 or 2 sports at the most. And so I don't know, after that 1.5 years, I started to ski again and ride a bike. And every time I did, I started to realize God had given me the gift of my life back again. And so it increased my faith. The crazy part is that it's been a while since we've told this story. And as I go back and relive some of that, I realize that there's more opportunity for us to actually be open about what's happening in our life, and some of the struggles that we have, you still lack faith, even though you've had a miracle in your life. It's almost like you need another miracle to have your faith be increased as well. It brought us closer together as a family. Yeah.
You were even saying like your time with your kid, like they're gonna tell you, you're not even gonna remember your kids. So now every time you're playing ball with your kids or whatever, it's just the colors would pop more. Life just seemed to pop.
Yeah, I remember throwing a baseball for the first time with my son and tears coming to my eyes, realizing, I am able to actually get back what I lost.
Right, it's amazing. And one of the main points that Paul makes in this, and why it's exemplified here so much, is he says, what do you have that you did not receive? You did not have the power to heal yourself. That you are a recipient of grace. Period. That's all of us. You woke up. God chose not to kill you at 40, right? He decided to heal you. I mean, not kill you, but, and if you're here and you're awake and you're alive right now, that's because God decided that you were going to wake up this morning. No, you didn't go, I have power in me, I shall do this. You wanted all the power in the world to be able to just walk in there and make things according to the will of Joslyn. That's what you want. That's what we all want. He goes, you're puffed up. You are a recipient. You received it. And don't you know that you have everything that you actually need? You're already rich, so knock it off. Stop trying to pine after the things of the world. And sometimes I'm going to knock your knees out so that you realize you already have everything you need. If you have Jesus, all the stuff in the world becomes dim. You are a recipient of grace. You cannot make it happen, but it's oftentimes in those moments of difficulty that you realize it. And I was reading Jordan Peterson the other day. He's a clinical psychologist. And he talks about in one of his lectures, he has this series of Bible lectures that he did at U of T back in the day. All of his students, sitting there, all these grad students, 22, 23. And it's a couple paragraphs here, but just listen to it. He says, and he's doing a biblical lecture on the flood narrative, okay? And he says this: it's a funny thing that I've noticed that our education system and the way we teach students, there are trigger warnings and all of that. Absolutely rubbish. In most of my lectures, I'd have to give a trigger warning every 15 seconds. I tell my students when they're young, look, don't fool yourself. You're going to develop a serious illness, at least one, maybe two or three. And one of them is likely to be chronic. And if it isn't you, it's going to be someone you love. It's going to be your husband. It's going to be your parent. It's going to be your kids. That is coming. And so is a lot of death and pain. Just exactly what sort of person are you going to be when that shows up? That's the right question. It isn't, how are you going to be happy in your life? It's like, good luck with that. That's a stupid ambition, as far as I'm concerned, because it's too shallow. Happiness comes and goes like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. If you're happy, more power to you. Enjoy it. It's a gift to be happy. But a pursuit? No. The pursuit is when the flood comes, you want to be the person who built the ark. And that's what the story of Noah is about. And then he says this: the flood is always coming. That's another thing that's worth mentioning about this story. There's an apocalyptic element to the Christian tradition. There's an idea that the end of the world is always at hand and that you should be prepared to be judged. The thing about that is, it's true. The reason it's true is because the end of your world is at hand. It will certainly come, and you will be judged when it comes, and it will be up to you to figure out what to do with the fact that your world just collapsed. That will be a moral problem of ultimate severity. It'll push you right to your limits, and you'll find out where exactly your unaddressed weaknesses lie, because that's what happens in a crisis. The reason that's an archetypal reality, and the reason that it lurks underneath the entire Christian structure, the impending apocalypse, is that we always live in apocalyptic times. Your world is always, in small ways and large ways, coming to an end. So what do? You prepare for it. You prepare for your world to come to an end, and then maybe when the end comes, you get another world. That'd be a good deal, so that we're ready for the next week. That is literally what Paul has just come from in chapter 3. Remember, he said, the end is coming. What did you build your life on? Straw, hay, or stone that's gonna last. And then he moves into this, and he says, why are you guys elevating leaders? Paul ideas, getting puffed up, going after the things. I want riches, I want this. You think you're making all this happen? You think the New Age story is true? That if you go deep inside yourself, that you're partly divine and just get into the spark and you can make it happen. You can make your life, you can make your health, you can make your wealth. Just speak life and speak positive. And he just goes, you are recipients of grace. So walk like that. And if you wake up tomorrow, okay, so end it this way. You're sitting at home, the two of you decide to go out for dinner.
So we go in,
This is months later?
Six months later. We go to Joe Forte's downtown Vancouver, and we're sitting out at lunch on the deck, top deck. There's only one other table that has people at it. Joslyn and I are sitting down.
And it's a huge patio.
Huge patio. And she's staring over my shoulder, and she says, oh my gosh, those are the two doctors that said you were dead.
The only other two people in the whole restaurant on the patio.
So she's like, I said, I gotta go talk to them. She said, don't talk to them. I'm angry still. I said, I gotta go talk to them. They saved my life. So I got up, and Joslyn followed me, reluctantly.
They didn't recognize you.
I said, excuse me, sirs, but I couldn't remember their names. But anyway, you guys saved my life. And the guy drops his fork as he's eating his pasta. and he said, "You were dead."
Wow.
And he goes, "I remember you. You were dead." And I said, "Well, I'm not. I'm still here." and then I said,
"You were dead."
Yeah. I said, "Thank you. Thank you for saving my life."
Recipient, you received that. You were dead. Yeah. Amazing what God does. God still heals. God still does miracles. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your story. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful that we do get to receive your love, your grace, your peace, oftentimes your healing. Not all the time. At some point, obviously, we will come to be with you, but the prayers of your saints were answered in Sam's case, and we're thankful for it because now he gets a little more time to point people to you. And it was in the midst of the pressure that Joss felt your presence more than she had ever in her life, and we know that's the paradox of our life. We would never ask for it, but Lord, you are so intense in the midst of those things. And I pray that we as a people would prepare ourselves for the inevitability of this, and that we wouldn't look to the wrong worldview, religion. We wouldn't look to ourselves to save ourselves, the spark inside of us, a religion that tells us to climb a mountain, and maybe if we're good enough, God will heal us. Or maybe if we're good enough, we'll never have those things happen in our life. That's that moralistic, therapeutic, deistic idea that crushes so many under the burden of religion. Let us look to Jesus, the one who came down from heaven and suffered in our place, who all the grace of the Father comes through to us who've trusted in you. The one who says, you are rich already, because I, who was rich, became poor so that you might become rich. Spirit, you have everything that you need. As we worship and respond, I pray that we would do it from a place of recognizing we don't need one thing more, nothing, if we have you. Let us actually believe that. Let that get into the core of our being. That you would be the ultimate treasure, and we would exude a life where that's true. We'd be more prepared than the world around us because of our perspective, that we know the flood is coming. We have our faith in someone wherein the reality is it's not that you promise that we won't drown, it's that we're safe in drowning. You are so good. We thank you for their story, that this was your will this time, and let it be over and over again. In Jesus' great name we pray, amen.